And welcome. Raise your inner game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how is your mental game this week? How are you doing? Hope things are good. Getting deep into the back to school vibe now. Hard to believe. Summer's gone by pretty fast. Been a good one, but I'm not totally happy it's ending. Our kids are both excited to get back to school, and that's a great feeling as a parent, right? It wasn't always that way, but Francis loves her high school. Peter's excited to get back to college. He's loving that. That's excellent. Always a little crazy getting everything ready to go, too, of course, that back to school checklist. But overall, pretty good. So plenty to talk about this week. A bit of a health concern for me, but don't worry, it's fine. The DNC convention, new disturbing video from Project 2025, the danger in comparing ourselves to others, some new information on the health risks of alcohol, and some book and show updates. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what gave me a lift this week and what things were pulling me down? My lift this week, the big one is that I have kicked my Coke Zero habit, or at least it's been a week now. Can't really say I've absolutely kicked it, but it's been a week. That's a pretty big deal for me, as you may know. I've been drinking probably a liter of Coke Zero a day for, I don't know, a year or more. I mean, it seems like it's been even longer. Just part of my daily routine, breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, every day. The reason I stopped is that I've been having some pretty strong SVTs, which is when your heart basically doubles its speed. I get them when I'm exerting myself, especially when I'm playing pickleball. Caffeine is one of the main things they recommend avoiding to keep SVTs from happening. And last Thursday, pickleball league night, I just decided I'd had enough of them, and it was time to kick the habit. It's so funny with an addiction like that. Up until that moment, I was totally fine, drinking 3 Coke Zeros a day. Sometimes I have 4 a day. I knew it wasn't good for me, but it didn't seem bad enough to feel bad about doing it, beyond what I know about the effect it has on self-control and self-esteem in general. But I was totally fine with it all that time. All of a sudden, that night, it all turns around. I can't think of any reason not to cut it out, except that it might be hard to do. But in that moment, it was an easy decision. I'm done, no question, no problem. And it has actually been pretty easy all week. Didn't have much of any withdrawal symptoms, maybe a little tired, but no headache, anything like that. One interesting thing I've done to help, the big question, or one big question, when you're breaking a habit like this is, what will you do to replace it? What will give you a similar satisfaction? And a lot of times that's really hard to figure out. But in this case, it was pretty easy. I've been having all my regular, Coke Zeros over ice in a big glass. So I just started having a big glass of sparkling water over ice instead. It's a very similar experience, actually a better flavor. I can have more than one glass if I want. It's actually a real improvement in several ways. So that's just made it pretty easy and, of course, super helpful. Of course, it's a good up on top of that because I feel better for having done it. I feel good about myself. I feel good not to have that weird caffeine stimulation and to remove that trigger for SVTs. I haven't tested the effect on SVTs yet. Haven't played pickleball since then, but I'm happy about kicking that habit no matter how that goes. So that's been great. Also nice to be able to say to my family, hey, guess what? No Coke for 5 days, and get their support for that. They were never happy with all the soda I was drinking, as you can imagine. So that's nice. For my downs this week, the main one is health-related, as I hinted earlier. So, excuse me, again, Thursday night pickleball, I mentioned, decided I had enough of the SVTs, kicked the Coke Zero habit, all of that. It's very typical for me after a night of pickleball that my heart is acting up a bit throughout the evening, pounding pulse, a little uneven feeling. It sort of feels like it got worked really hard and it's just recovering for a bit, settling back down. But the next morning, Friday, that was still going on. And my watch gives me an alert that says, looks like you're having atrial fibrillation. Might want to check that out. So I do, and sure enough, all of a sudden, I have initial onset atrial fibrillation, or AFib for short. And it's still going on today, right now, 1 week later. AFib is when your heart gets an uneven beat. The space between them changes, the quality of them changes. Like if you look at it on a graph, an EKG, there'll be those little spikes and there'll be varied spaces, and sometimes it'll just kind of, go off and just keeps going like that. So the good news is we've had the full workup now and it's fine. It's normal. It's not a sign of damage or anything I've done. I'm going to go back in a couple of weeks and get it shocked back into a normal rhythm. That sounds a little scary, but apparently it's very common and effective. No need to cut back on any of my physical activities. All fine. But I was worried about that up until this appointment yesterday on all those points. Was this a sign that I was pushing things too hard? Did I actually do damage? Does it mean I can't keep playing pickleball, going to the gym anymore? Is this an extension of the other heart issues I've had? Is it all just getting worse and worse? Oh, also, I had a standard follow-up echocardiogram a couple of days before this all happened that showed some dilation on the right side. So was that related? Again, has there been some damage? I was worried about all of that. And I was actually getting pretty bummed, right? Pretty concerned. It was weighing on me all the time for those, several days. It's kind of funny as I think about this. We never really want things to change, right? Or at least I don't. When things are going, they're in a rhythm, I want everything to stay the same. And that's a big part of my worry was that, oh man, things were going so great and now I got to figure out new ways to do everything again. So I was just really bummed that this new level of physical activity that seems so good on so many levels, I was going to have to stop now because it was doing some damage in some way and putting me at risk. But it turns out none of that is true. Interesting, that heart dilation might actually be a good sign of the impact of the exercise. The doctor said they tend to see that in athletes. Funny to think of myself as an athlete. I'm not sure she was saying that, but she wasn't at all concerned about that. So anyway, this, of course, has been a classic down, right? A high gravity situation. Something happened that has me spend a lot of time in my head worrying, thinking, just getting pulled down by it. It's also affected me physically because I haven't been exercising as a precaution. I did go to the gym after the appointment yesterday, so already getting back on track with that. But it's been a tough few days, just having that hanging over me. Happy that it's all fine, of course, getting back in the groove, but a great illustration of the high gravity concept. All right, those are my ups and downs for this week. Kicking my Coke Zero habit, yay. Worried about my new AFib, blah, but all good now. All right, next up, top stories. Big news this week is the Democratic National Convention and the election, the ongoing election. Honestly, I was a little bit bummed to not have the polls moving faster. I keep expecting them to be getting better and better, which, by the way, is contributing quite a bit to my checking the news habit. Oh, goodness, been checking the polls a lot. They're still looking fine. The trend is good. I just thought the upward movement would be going a bit faster. Feeling very good about the convention. I'm not actually watching it. I can't imagine doing that, spending all that time. I'm just catching highlights and commentary. But I could not be more impressed and honestly inspired by the messages. Just great on every level. Cannot imagine it wouldn't be attractive and persuasive to voters. I guess the big question is, strategically, are undecided voters watching? Good chance they're not, I suppose. And if not, it's mostly speaking to the choir. But even then, the excitement and the motivation for all the donors and volunteers out there doing the work, talking to people, that's golden. Inspiration, messaging, stories to tell. Could not be better. I'm writing this Thursday morning. Heard from Tim Walz last night. Have not heard the final night yet. Will be very surprised if that's not also excellent. We just seem to have really dialed in the vibe and messaging, and it just feels perfect to me. Perfect contrast to Trump and MAGA and Project 2025. Speaking of Project 2025, you may have seen this, but there was this new video this week from one of the founders, a guy named Russel Vought. Funny side note, the Amazon show, The Boys, I've talked about, insanely graphic and violent, but super entertaining and insightful show about corrupt superheroes. The company behind it all in the show, the evil corporate entity behind the superheroes is called Vought Enterprises, spelled the same. I assume that's a coincidence, but it's a pretty good one. Anyway, Russel Vought lays out the core vision in this video of Project 25, even beyond the specifics we've talked about already. And among many other things, he says, I want to make sure that we can say we're a Christian nation, that it's time to rehabilitate Christian nationalism as part of the mission to embrace the country's Judeo-Christian worldview value system. The problem is, of course, we are not a Christian nation. Never have been. We're not designed to be one. We have a lot of Christians here, for sure. That's not the same thing. From our government's perspective and the Constitution, we are a secular nation that respects the religious beliefs or lack of beliefs of all citizens equally. That is the actual reality of our constitutional system. Anyone who stands against that and tries to change it is trying to bring down our system. It really is that simple. They want to overturn it and replace it with the Christian nationalist system. And they are super clear about that. They're telling us exactly what they want to do. I will say again, the point I made recently, if you think this can't happen here, I heard this then and it just blew me away. Germany was the most progressive and inclusive country in Europe through basically all of history up until they voted Hitler into power and for the 12 years after that. And we all know how that worked out. It can definitely happen here. The other side is proudly declaring that's their goal. Now, I'm not saying they're going to round up all the Jews and, all that. It's just them taking over and reframing and reforming an authoritarian Christian ideology-based system. If we don't stand up and keep that from happening, it's on us. So that's a good amount of apocalyptic fun for this week. Bottom line, super happy for the vibe and the message and everything good coming out of the DNC and the Harris Walls movement. But we have to get out there and reject their dark, backward-looking plan. All right, next up, Inner Game Gold. Last week, we talked about the Marshawn Lynch technique, where you look in the mirror in the morning and ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be today? Super helpful thing to do. This week, I want to talk about a new idea, which is never compare someone else's outer game with your inner game. Never compare someone else's outer game with your inner game. This is a variation on an idea I heard in my industry, authors, experts, online course creators, which was never compare someone's front stage to your backstage. Meaning don't compare what you see on the outside of their business, their website, during a big presentation, etc., to the reality of what's going on back in your business, right? So obviously the idea is when we look at other people, we see them, maybe we talk to them, we look at their lives, they tend to look happier and more with it and successful than we feel, right? And of course, with social media, this effect has exploded. People's happy posed pictures in beautiful places, it's all you see. And our lives and businesses and projects never look that perfect. So this comparing we do is killing people's satisfaction with their lives and adding a ton of weight to their inner gravity. So it's super important and helpful to remember, to remind ourselves that this is a total illusion. It's simply not true. Everyone struggles. Life is hard by definition. I actually have a couple of songs about this, oddly enough, from back in the day. One's called We're Okay for Humans, which talks about this idea that being a human being is inherently emotionally difficult. This combination of having imagination and creativity and self-awareness on the one hand, combined with our base survival instincts and tribalism on the other, is just designed to make things hard. Of course, the struggles vary from one person and family and business to another, but to think that any one of us is the only one struggling like we are is just forgetting the reality of life. One great reminder of this is watching the sports documentaries I've been talking about on Netflix. On paper, these elite athletes have so little in common with our lives, it's funny to even think about a comparison. But when you hear them talk, when you see them with their families, it's the same. We have pressures on us, we have responsibilities, we suffer setbacks and failures, we have no idea what we're doing, we're insecure, imposter syndrome. And all of this is true no matter who we are, where we are, or what we do. It's just the nature of human life. And that's what the second song I mentioned talks about. It's called Nothing, and it's from the perspective of Superman, how he has the same kinds of struggles with confidence and purpose, but no one feels bad for him, right? He feels alone. Anyway, that's the idea of this new inner game, Gold. Don't let yourself compare what your life feels like to what others' lives look like. Assume they're having the same struggles you are, if not worse. We have no idea what other people are going through, right? So one great exercise to help with this is when you see someone, you're out on an errand, whatever, you see someone else, ask yourself, I wonder what's going on for them today. What's happening at work or at home? What are they worried about? What are they thinking about? Just what's their life like today? You can just feel yourself softening as you do that, can't you? That might be just me, but I kind of doubt it. I think we all tend to be on guard with people, and we tend to focus more on what we imagine are our differences than on what we have in common. But asking questions like these turns that around and helps us see that our lives are probably actually pretty similar to theirs in the things that really matter to us, our goals, our worries, our struggles, and that we're not nearly as alone as we might think we are. Anyway, this is this week's Inner Game Gold. Never compare people's outer game to your inner game. Assume everyone has the same struggles that you do. All right, next up, raise your outer game. Last week, we talked about the handoff, which is a great communication technique for listening and connecting better in verbal conversations, for improving your relationships. This week, I want to switch from communication and relationships to health, and specifically to alcohol, and some new warnings coming out about the health risks of drinking alcohol. I was at an event last month, maybe the month before. It was the pickleball tournament I talked about that I sponsored and played in. So my sponsor booth there was next to a woman from a local cancer care organization, and she said we are about to see new health guidelines for alcohol that basically says there's no safe level and that it is known to cause cancer. I hadn't heard that before. So that was interesting. We've all heard different accounts over the years that maybe a drink or two a day is actually a plus for our health, right? For the relaxation effects, heart health, and so on. And of course, if we enjoy a glass of wine or a beer or a cocktail now and then, we want that to be the case. But this latest science, and they're especially forceful on this in Europe, but apparently it's a strong enough connection that we're going to start seeing cancer warning labels on alcohol like we do on cigarettes. So I don't know enough about this to suggest anything definitive, like what's the actual difference? How much more likely am I to get cancer? How many drinks, how frequently, over how much time? I drank a good amount in my 20s, but have done almost none for decades now. Is the risk still there? Many questions about the practical application, but I still thought it was worth mentioning, and I'll link to an article because I still think most of us feel perfectly fine having a drink, even pretty regularly. And if it really is a bigger risk than we realized, might be worth reframing that and taking another look at your consumption. So that's really it. Just take a fresh look at your alcohol consumption, maybe do some reading if this is news to you, and then see if you can find a comfortable way to cut back. Sounds like every bit less is good. By the way, when they say there's no safe level, they don't mean every drop is life-threatening. What that means is there's no consumption level below which there is no evidence of increased risk. It's always dangerous. The only question is how much dangerous and at what level. Anyway, that's Raise Your Outer Game for this week. Alcohol apparently causes cancer with some risk at every level. So take another look at your consumption and think about ways you can cut back. Next up, our challenge of the week. This week, I want to again give you two choices, or maybe go crazy and do both. Challenge number 1, connect with people's struggles. When you're out in public this week with the strangers you see, ask yourself what they might be going through and dealing with today. It's such a great exercise. So do that and see what effect it has on you. How does it change how you feel about them and about you and your life? Challenge number 2, no alcohol for 1 week. Now, maybe that's no challenge at all for you because you're like me and you never really have any anyway. But if you do have a drink now and then, this would be a great thing to do. No alcohol of any kind for 7 days. So what will it take to do that? What will you drink instead? How will you handle it when the offer is made? And so on. As always, it's a great idea to write down your experience with both of these in a journal of some sort. That's where the actual insights come from. But those are our challenges for the week. Ask yourself about other people's struggles and or no alcohol for 7 days. Next up, highly recommended. This week, just a couple things. I mentioned a sci-fi book I was reading last week. Title is The Mercy of Gods. Author is James Corey. Honestly, ended up a little disappointed. It was interesting. It was well done. Fascinating new world. All those things you look for in science fiction. But it hinted in the beginning of a big conflict that never really came. It ended up feeling like just one big setup for the next book. Literally the last line in the book was basically what I've been waiting for the whole book. So I'm a little conflicted about the next one. I do want to know what happens. I'm interested, but I don't quite trust the author to make it what I'm looking for. So we'll see about that one. A new book, I picked up the latest Gabriel Allon book. That's the character's name. The author is Daniel Silva. Title is A Death in Cornwall. I think this is actually his latest book. These are the books now where Gabriel is retired from the spy business, but ends up solving mysteries mainly in the art world or related to it. I always love them. And I was reminded of that right from the beginning with this one. It's well written, it's fast-paced, good characters, very entertaining. A little disappointed at a meta level to be picking up another in the series so soon after the last one. I would like to have a little more variety generally. But it's hard to find a good book. I want to read sometimes, so I'm happy enough to be in this one. I'll let you know how it goes, but I'm confident it's going to be good. They always are. For TV, I mentioned last week Bad Monkey on Apple TV with Vince Vaughn. Margaret and I are still watching that. They only release one episode a week, so it takes a while. But the fact that we're still watching tells me it'll probably work out well. And the end of this last episode, number 3, was quite a surprise. Makes everything more interesting now. Also the sports documentaries, Drive to Survive and Receiver. Really loving Receiver. I mentioned it earlier, but I really enjoy seeing behind the scenes with athletes at this level. There's just something about it I find very inspiring and satisfying to see what it's like for these players. Interesting that the Formula One show, Drive to Survive, doesn't hook me in the same way. I mean, I still like it, but it doesn't hook me, like I say, in the same way. And I think it's because that show doesn't focus nearly as much on the drivers. It's more about the team and the business and the competition and pressure at that level. It just doesn't dig into the driver experience the way the other shows do. And for me, I get a lot more out of connecting with the athletes. Anyway, both shows, highly recommended. I'm just getting a bit more out of Receiver than Drive to Survive. And that is highly recommended for this week. Reminder to check out the Raise Your Inner Game book for more on boosting your mental game, or the Sports Academy to take your sports game to a higher level. Programming note, we'll be off again next week. Sorry so soon, but it's back to school road trip, taking Peter back to college, but we'll be back again the week after that, Tuesday and Friday. All right, that's it for this week. I hope you have a great 2 weeks. Keep up the good work. I'll talk to you next time.